here, and we'll dive right into it, Jeremy.
Thank you, Your Honor. Yes, tonight is the informational meeting for the proposed 2022 budget and property tax levy that would finance that budget. So the outcomes that we're hoping to accomplish tonight is to provide an overview of the legislation that affects our property taxes and our budget, as well as a summary of the market value and tax capacity for the city, the proposed property tax levy, as well as reviewing the budgets for the city's general special revenue capital project, debt service, and enterprise funds. And then the next two steps would be to announce when we would be proposing to adopt the final levy and budget, as well as provide an opportunity for public comment tonight. So the next few slides are similar to what we've seen in the past as far as how property tax rates are calculated in the state of Minnesota. For residential, it's the same as prior years, as well as commercial. The first $500,000 of market value is taxed at 1%, and then anything above that at 1.25%. And then it's a little bit slightly different for non-homesteaded properties. 4 or more units are at 1.25% straight. For commercial and industrial tax rates, the first $500,000 market value is calculated at 1.5%, and then anything above that $150,000 market value is at 2%. In addition to that, the state also does impose a state property tax, and that rate is approximately 37%, and that's utilized for general education in the state of Minnesota. One of the changes that occurred in the last few years is the first $100,000 of commercial and industrial valuation is exempt from the state property tax, and that was done for some smaller business property tax relief. One of the next components is state aid that cities receive. The city of Baxter doesn't receive any local government aid, hasn't for a significant amount of time. There hasn't really been any change on here, but we have seen kind of a roller coaster effect over the early 2000s when the market value homestead credit that was in place at the time was temporarily reduced when the state was going through its budget deficits between 2003 and 2006. That was completely eliminated in 2008, and then finally the legislature and governor through a special session in 2011 replaced it with a market value homestead exclusion, which reduces the valuation on residential homesteaded property to reduce the overall property taxes. And that formula is based on 40% of the first $76,000 of market value, and then it's phased out by 9% over anything over $76,000 until it reaches zero at a little over $413,000 of market value. So looking at the city's estimated market value composition for Payable 2022, you can see that about 52% of the city is comprised of homestead residential valuations, followed by 30% commercial, and then a really small percentage of industrial at 1%, and non-homesteaded apartments make up about 15% of the pie, and then to a lesser degree there's some ag and rural as well as manufactured land for manufactured homes. The next graph here just shows a little bit of the tax capacity trend over the last 10 years. From 2013, we've slowly climbed from about $10.1 million of tax capacity to, it's really hard to read, a little over $12 million of tax capacity in 2022 being proposed. Actually, that's $13 million. So if we look at how the property tax is calculated for the city of Baxter for our proposed 2022 budget, we have general fund operations of a little over $6 million. In addition to that, about $646,000 that's being transferred for other operations for a total proposed property tax levy of $6,663,000. In addition to that, we have a debt service special levy of $1,076,000 that's been flat for a number of years, comprising then of a total of a little over $7.7 million property tax levy. That's been reduced just slightly from the preliminary levy that went out in the tax statements by $16,100. So if you take that proposed property tax levy and then divide it by our tax base or our preliminary net tax capacity of the almost $5 million, you come up with a tax capacity rate of comparison to our existing 2021 property tax levy and tax capacity rate of $7.2 million with a tax base of $12.7 million and a 56.755% rate, the overall levy increase is about $482,500, or about a 6.65% increase in the levy from 2021. The next graph here just shows how that operating and debt service levies have changed over the last 10 years. The proposed property tax levy of a little over $7.7 million has increased about $2.3 million, or about 42% over the last 10 years. During that same time period, inflation has increased by about 20%. So next, just kind of looking at how this impacts individual properties with different valuations. The first set of charts here looks at assuming there were no changes in valuation to those existing residential or commercial valuations from Payable 2021 to Payable 2022. So looking at that $76,000 valued home, that real lower valued home, where that full homestead market value exclusion of $30,400 is in effect, you come up with a taxable market value of $45,600, multiplied by 1%, results in a tax capacity of $456 times the existing 2021 tax capacity rate of about 120%. And then in addition to that, there's some school market referendum taxes that are calculated based on that full $76,000 market value. For the city's portion of the taxes, it's $259 for that $76,000 home, with an overall tax bill including the jurisdictions of Crow Wing County, Independent School District 181, Region 5, and Crow Wing County HRA of $651. So then kind of looking at that average value home at about $250,000, going through that same formula, results in 2021 city taxes of about $1,335, or overall taxes for all the jurisdictions of a little under $3,200. And then also looking at just a smaller valued commercial industrial property at $500,000 has a tax capacity of $9,250. That's reduced slightly by that first $100,000 on the commercial tax rate that's applied by the state, but the state had a tax rate of about almost 36%. That results in overall city taxes of about $5,250. But when you look at the taxes for all the jurisdictions, including the state of Minnesota, which makes up about another third or so of that, results in a tax bill of about $14,552. If you compare that now to 2022 for those same valuations, you can see using that revised combined tax rate, which went down slightly, led more by the county and the school district. Cities went up slightly from 119% down to 117%. Results in an overall dollar change on that low value $76,000 home of $21 overall, but the city's portion of that no change valuation actually just increases slightly by $3. In comparison, that $250,000 average value home at $92 overall reduction, or about a $15 increase in the city portion of it, or about 1.1% across the board for the city's portion. This is again assuming there's no valuation changes that had occurred. And then on that commercial property, about a $59 increase for the city's portion, and $223 overall reduction estimated. This just kind of summarizes that once again, that change for the city's portion only of with no valuation changes. And again, this is kind of reflect each jurisdiction will adopt their final levy in December, so that could be subject to slight reductions as well if jurisdictions reduce their levies. So then the next set of tables just looks at kind of that average valuation increase based on Crow Wing County information from the abstracts. For average residential valuation, those increased by about 3.75%. Commercial increased by an average 2.82%. Combined, the overall increase was just under 3% then citywide. So this first table, again, same numbers, looking at the 2021 existing for that $76,000 valuation, the $250,000 and the $500,000 commercial industrial small business. with that valuation increasing by about 3.75% on average for the residential, and a little under about 2.8% on commercial industrial. You can see the overall dollar change on the taxes is anywhere from $19 to $39 on the residential side, and $229 for that smaller valued residential that's now valued at $514,000. The city's portion of that increased between $21 to $74 for those three valuations, and then $221 for that smaller commercial industrial. That increased from $500,000 to $514,000. So the overall increase there was about 4.2%. Looking at the city's portion, and then anywhere from 8 to 5.5% increase for residential, assuming once again that 3.75% average increase in valuations. Keeping in mind that's just an average, each value will change slightly just depending on how the county values that specific property. So next, just looking at how that breaks out, I guess, for that $175,000 residential valuation by jurisdiction would result in a tax bill of about $2,017. That's comprised about 44% of that portion of the tax bill, or $881 is the city's portion, followed by the school districts at $640 or 32%, and Crow Wing counties at 485% for about a quarter of it. And then a negligible part of it goes to the county HRA for $9 and about $2 to Region 5. You can see overall on the table over here how those proposed changes are sitting right now, looking at the final tax rates for 2021 to the proposed tax rates for 2022. The city of Baxter is adjusted for the $16,000 that we're looking at reducing at this point. So our portion of the tax rate is going up a little over 0.6%, whereas the county is going down about 1.4%, and the school district's about 1.7%. So overall, about 2.6 reduction in the rate from about 118.7 to 117.1. So next, looking at our proposed 2022 budget for funds we budget for, which includes our general fund, certain special revenue funds, capital project funds, debt service funds, and enterprise funds. Looking at the revenues by category, you can see once again the largest portion of our proposed revenue sources continues to be the property tax base, since we receive very little local government aid and other intergovernmental revenues overall. I guess bulk of this 8.6% is the gas tax that we receive through municipal state aid funds, as well as some dedicated sources for police state aid as well. But followed by property taxes, about 20% then overall is charges for services, which is the bulk of that is our enterprise fund, water, sewer, stormwater fees that we charge on a monthly basis. And then the third largest funding source of the budget is the sales tax that's used for capital projects and debt service related to those capital projects, followed by intergovernmental revenues, and then you kind of see some, to a lesser degree, some of the other funding revenue sources. So then looking at the expenditure side of the ledger by function for the 2022 proposed budget, debt service makes up about 28% of the overall budgeted funds that we budget for. Then we have our enterprise funds, including water, sewer, and stormwater, and then public safety, which includes police and fire, as well as building inspections, and then general government, about 9.9%, followed by some of the other smaller ones here, including public works, parks, community development, and then some of the capital equipment purchases that we budgeted for replacement and new items. So total revenues proposed net of transfers for the 2022 budget are a little over $20.5 million. Expenditures net of transfers are about 26.1%, or $26.1 million, excuse me, for a decrease in fund balance of about $5.6 million, which is attributable largely in part to one half of that or more to prepay or with the early redemption of the 2006 bonds from existing fund balance. And then in addition to that, our depreciation and our utility funds, as we've discussed before, are fully funded. In addition to that, we have some various just timing issues with when sales tax proceeds are collected and special assessments for those debt service payments and capital projects, and then utilizing some cash on hand So looking specifically at our general fund revenues and transfers, we have $7.8 million total revenues. Once again, largest funding source within the general fund is the property tax levy. And then we have some operating transfers from other funds, primarily utility funds that pay for part of their operating costs that are utilized by the general fund. Franchise fees funding about $202,000, and charges for services of $151,000. It rounded out the top four. On the expenditure side, then again, a balanced budget being proposed of $7.8 million. You can see the various expenditures here. Police is the largest one within the general fund of $2.4 million, followed by parks and grounds maintenance at about almost $1.2 million. And third would be street lighting at about $1.15 million. So then just some of the quick highlights of the general fund. We have funding for the Senior Center, 4th of July, and the Central Minnesota Initiative Foundation, as well as within our general government department, as well as property tax, or excuse me, property insurance that's not specifically allocated to other departments. We do have elections in 2022, so those have been budgeted for. We've adjusted the city attorney and prosecuting contracts based now on what we kind of know after a couple of years with the city of Brainerd with the new formula for the legal part of that equation. And we have some funding for various citywide network infrastructure maintenance and information systems department. Within Public Works Administration, $25,000 for engineering. There's a proposed intern for 2022, as well as funding for the overlap of the proposed retirement of the engineering tech. Police Department, about $10,000 increase in fuel based on higher fuel prices. We have $32,000 budgeted for software maintenance, which includes the body and squad cameras, and $15,000 for other equipment. $5,100 for the K9 program, and about $30,000 for the animal control contracted services. The other portion of the public safety equation then is the fire protection with our contract with the city of Brainerd, and that amount is $353,700 for 2022. It's about a 0.7% decrease from our current budget. Streets and street lighting, we have about $31,000 in increase in personnel services, and that's related to the restructuring, including adding a position that we shared between the streets and stormwater fund. $12,000 for seasonal staffing, including a public works intern, some street sign replacements, as well as $50,000 for contract plowing, and $90,000 for salt and sand. About $155,000 then for crack sealing and striping, $15,000 for right-of-way tree removal, $24,000 for public works maintenance, facility maintenance, $144,000 of miscellaneous street improvements, including $40,000 for 1-inch street overlays being proposed for 2022, $30,000 for vehicle and machinery repairs, and $123,000 for street and signal light utilities and maintenance, including increased growing power costs that we see. In parks and grounds maintenance, $85,800 for seasonal staffing is budgeted, $70,000 for additional contracted services, and then a little over $12,000 or so for minor equipment, including $2,000 for a fishing machine and $2,600 for safety net replacements, $18,000 for landscaping, $31,500 for building and structure repairs, and that includes Berrywood Park and Lauren Thompson Court repairs and ring perimeter fencing. About $62,000 for an addition of a new truck with a plow and a Tommy gate, and about $15,000 for addition of a new dump trailer that will be utilized between the streets and parks department. In our recreation department, we contract with ISDA D181 Community Education for administration of that program, and the budget amount for 2022 is $20,000. And then finally, within the general fund, we do have some transfers for funding of some of the other special revenue and capital project funds shown there. We'll look at those budgets more specifically. So within our budgeted amounts for 2022, we have the special revenue funds, proposed budgets for our cemetery, capital parks, community development, economic development, lodging tax administration, tax increment funds or TIF funds, and sales tax collection funds. You can kind of see the proposed revenues and expenditures for those special revenue funds there. Special revenue funds are dedicated sources, transfers, and those include, some of those funding sources include cemetery plot sales, building permits, planning and zoning fees, all within the community development department for those two. Park dedication fees, economic development activities, lodging tax, tax increment, and sales and motor vehicle tax within the sales tax collection fund. Actually, the recycling grant funding has gone away now, so that would be no longer a funding source for the city. So specifically within the cemetery fund, we've accounts for about almost $40,000 of activities, including the balance of the columbarium project that was started with ordering of the columbarium this year, anticipated to be completed in 2022. Capital Parks Fund, we budgeted $10,000 for park priority plans, $7,500 for Oscar Christopherson Park needs study, $75,000 for Southwest Baxter Park planning, $34,800 for Camp Vanassa annual land payment to Crow County, and then up to $175,000 for the playground equipment replacement at Oscar Christopherson. So the Community Development Fund, as I mentioned, comprises the planning and building inspection departments. Our Economic Development Fund is the city's EDA fund, and the largest expenditure within that activity is the $36,000 contribution to WADAC for services. 95% of our collected lodging tax administration tax is remitted to the Lodging Association for marketing efforts, and that's about almost $310,000 proposed for 2022. And then our tax increment funds within our special revenue fund comprise of the city's economic development, redevelopment, housing, and renovation and renewal tax increment districts, and that's about $424,000 for 2022. The sales tax collection special revenue fund includes about a $1.5 million transfer to the 2013 A debt service fund, which funded a portion of the water treatment plant with sales tax proceeds. Another $579,000 is being utilized to finance the city's portion of wastewater treatment capacity with BPU, and about $1.3 million of funding is identified for utility capital improvement projects for 2022, including the Foley Road water, sewer, and stormwater improvements at $622,000, and the Isle Drive Fourth and Stormwater project at about $305,000, and the balance of the golf course commercial stormwater improvement project that's not funded by grants at about $376,000. Hopefully this isn't gonna be a lot on us here. I'm not sure what's going on in the background here, but about $600,000 of estimated revenue sharing with the city of Brainerd for the regional airport project, for which the city contributes 20% of our net sales tax proceeds each year up to $8 million until that's paid to Brainerd. So then for our capital project funds that are budgeted, we have 4, including the capital equipment fund, the municipal state aid collector street fund, which is funded from the gas tax primarily, as well as a general fund transfer. Street replacement fund, funded with franchise fees, and our trail construction and maintenance fund, which is also funded through franchise fees for the pavement management activities related to that activity. So for our capital equipment fund, it does provide a sinking fund for future capital equipment replacement purchases, and that really helps to minimize the annual capital outlay expenditure fluctuations that could occur from year to year. So we have a list of various items that are being replaced or updated there, including some PC replacements citywide next year, and infrastructure and network IT upgrades, $200,000 for citywide software upgrades, about $95,000 for 2 squad car replacements, $65,000 for the public works facility boiler replacement, and $54,000 for street truck replacement, and then finally just balance of $125,000 from the streets dump truck with plow had started already this year and will be scheduled to be completed next year. In addition to that, $85,000 for a new Bobcat in the Parks Department to replace the 2010 tractor, $10,500 for replacement of a parks mower, and then the $175,000 that's being utilized that'll transfer to the capital equipment, or excuse me, capital parks fund for that playground equipment for where this money has been accumulating, portion of it over the last couple of years. Within the municipal state aid collector street fund, again, it's a sinking fund that provides a minimizes the need to issue debt levy for some of those project costs when we're doing collector streets or providing for additional width or lanes or curb and gutter on some of our collector streets. We anticipate utilizing about $800,000 of funding within that fund for the Trunk Highway 210 and Inglewood improvements, as well as about $1.3 million towards the Foley Isle and Fourth portion of those improvements in 2022. Similarly, the street replacement fund provides for ongoing funding source for routine street maintenance, and the trail construction maintenance fund also for trails. And the trails construction and maintenance fund proposing to utilize $15,000 for engineering services for trail pavement management and $55,000 for ongoing trail and parking area maintenance funding, including some patching and crack sealing. And then finally, the last set of funds that we budget for are enterprise funds. That includes our water, sewer, and stormwater funds. You can see the proposed revenues and expenses there for those funds. And primarily the reason for the amount of revenues under expenses is a result, again, of that depreciation not being fully funded, as well as utilizing contributions within those funds towards planned capital infrastructure improvements, and then calling in that debt in the water fund from the 2006 bonds that were refinanced in 2013. So utility rates are currently being reviewed and will be reviewed further at tomorrow's work session. And those monthly user charges, development activities, and availability charges will continue to be monitored to ensure that we do have adequate debt coverage and coverage overall for the funding of the operations within those three enterprise funds. So specifically within the water fund expenses, we have about $37,000 of personnel services increases, once again related to that department reorganization, including adding a position that would be shared with the sewer fund specifically, $13,500 for seasonal maintenance staffing, including a public works intern, $10,600 for contracted mowing services, $30,000 for engineering, $55,000 for water treatment chemicals, about $120,000 of estimated Brainerd Public Utilities water purchases in January and February, as we hope the water plant will be back online at some point after that. About $129,000 of estimated electric and other utilities, $35,000 for repairs, including water mains, plant, and pond cleaning, $4,200 for water plant dehumidifier replacement, $65,000 for east water tower repairs, about $1.2 million of depreciation on the water plant and various infrastructure throughout the city, $33,000 for a shop sweep or replacement, almost $124,000 for the SCADA system upgrades for the water portion of that, $4,300 transfer for public works facility repairs, and then funding for some various projects, including the Foley Isle and Fourth project of $150,000, the 2022 FDR street improvement project of about $104,000, $15,000 transfer towards that final debt payment on the public works facility that water and sewer paid $15,000 annually towards through the WAC and SAC portion of the program. And about $2.5 million of debt service for the water treatment plant, which includes about $2 million of that is principal related to that early redemption of that 2013 bonds that were being paid early. Next, in the sewer enterprise fund for 2022, we have $18,000 personnel services. This is actually a reduction for that department reorganization. Again, that position that's being added is shared with water. $13,500 for seasonal maintenance staffing, including a public works intern, services, $8,000 for engineering, $40,000 for electric utilities, primarily related to the various lift stations throughout the city, and $605,000 of estimated Rare Public Utilities sewer treatment charges, $50,000 for other repairs and maintenance, including lift stations, and about $1.1 million of estimated depreciation. It's primarily our capacity share at the wastewater treatment plant, for which we have a capital asset, intangible capital asset. $4,300 transfer for public works facilities repairs, $86,000 for the sewer portion of those SCADA system upgrades, and about $154,000 for rehabilitation of lift station 13. And then the last three items, $150,000 estimated funding towards that Foley Island Fourth project, about $47,000 towards the 2022 FDR street improvements, and $15,000 towards that final bond payment on the public works facility. And then finally, within our Stormwater Enterprise Fund, once again, this was added in response to the federal and state MS4 requirements, including inspection requirements in 2006. So we have about $34,000 of personnel services increased for that department reorganization. That includes that added position that's shared with the streets department. We have $90,000 identified for street sweeping contracts. That's up from this year's budget of $40,000. $12,000 budgeted for ditch mowing, $10,000 for engineering and MS4 inspections, $100,000 for miscellaneous repair projects, including pond cleanings, about $357,000 of estimated depreciation, $7,400 share towards that SCADA system upgrade for stormwater, and $151,000 is the balance of the Section 6 outlet project that was started this year to complete that. About $1.7 million for the balance of the Excelsior Commercial Stormwater Pond project that was funded primarily with state grants, $73,000 for the Foley Isle and Fourth project for 2022, and $180,000 towards the 2022 FDR street project for next year. So then finally, our last governmental fund budget is within the debt service fund, comprises of all the various debt service funds for the city. We have proposed revenues of about $3.3 million and expenditures of about $4.8 million, with revenues being under expenditures by about $1.5 million. And that's typically just due to that timing difference from what revenues are collected and the debt services payments are made. We utilize the existing fund balance. That's exacerbated certainly a little bit more this year with the early call of those 2006 CIP bonds that were refinanced in 2013, making up about $1.1 million of that overall difference. So then the next steps in the budget and property tax levy include scheduling the adoption of the final levy and budget for our next council meeting in December, which would be December 21st, 2022 at 7 p.m. And then, as I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, the purpose of this meeting is to provide for public comments as well as reviewing the budget and levy. So we would certainly want to hear if there are any public comments related to the levy or budget for next year.
Okay, I'll start with the council. Any comments, questions of Jeremy?
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Can you go back to the slide in front of the first pie chart? So it might be easier to go back to the beginning.
This one right here.
Okay, go back a couple more.
Related to the calculation or the?
Well, maybe it's the next pie chart. It's the one where you're talking about the city portion of the taxes going up $3 on a $75,000 home. Okay, before that, okay, let's look at this one. Okay, maybe one before this. You go back one. Okay, no, this is fine. So this is the slide where you're talking about the average valuation going up 3 because if the value of the house is only going up 4%, why is the city portion of the tax go up? If you flip to the next slide, it went from 3 to 21, so it went up 7 times. If you go back like 2 or 3 slides to where we had $75,000 home, city portion went up $3.
I think it's part of it's just a function of the fact that the increase, way that increase is changing how it overall works with the portion that went up. So a very low value property is going to go up
Well, but
percentage-wise.
even if you go and look the other way, look at a $250,000 house, and the change in taxes from last year on a $250,000 house was $21, and then it went back 2 slides, I think, up 1 maybe. So, okay, $15 on a $250,000 house,
Mhm.
and then when you go with the 4% increased residential value, it was like $256,000. It goes up to $74, so it's like 5 times. I guess I'm not tracking why that difference is in there, and if people are gonna look at the difference from this year, or look at the fact that we're gonna pay more taxes because the value of our houses went up, if it only went up 4%, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I think part of that is also just the overall share is shifting a little bit because that 3.75% average residential increase is more than the only 2.8% that commercial overall went up too. So some of that overall tax burden is shifting more towards residential.
So the residential this year is paying more of the total taxes than the residential last year.
Everything else being equal based on that average, yeah. Each property's, of course, is gonna be different.
But 5 times as much. It doesn't seem right.
Yeah, I think part of it has to do just with the fact that when you look at percentages, they don't always compute out that way, because the increase is looking at the overall change, but it's kind of compounding the fact that that valuation went up as well as the overall city's portion of the tax went up as well. This is looking specifically just at the city's.
Right, I understand that.
So I mean, not only did our tax rate, go up, but if you looked at the fact that those valuations went up too, it kind of compounds that a little bit more. I think I'm not explaining that quite
No,
well.
you're explaining it and it makes sense, but in my mind, if I have a $250,000 house,
Mhm.
and if there was no valuation change,
Yeah,
my tax this year would be $15 more.
right.
Okay, but now if my house goes up $6,000, did I read that right? Go back.
About $9,000,
Oh,
yeah.
okay, so it went up $9,000.
Mhm.
My taxes go up 5 times.
Yeah.
Which, if you look at the percentages, you were at 1.1, now we're 5.5.
Mhm.
I can't grasp the math of how 4% increase in my residential taxes go up 5 times, that's
Right.
all.
Yeah, the other part of that equation is that homestead value exclusion too, as Brad's pointing out to me. If you look at, in this valuation change, that higher $259,000 valuation right now, you're only getting about $13,900 reduced to lower your taxable market value for which your taxes are based on. So you're basing that tax on $246,000 or so.
So that's the number we should be looking at.
Yeah, so then if you go back here, it was based on $235,000.
But again, that's only $11,000 difference in
Yeah.
value.
Yeah, it's just a function of how the equations work. I think, the one thing too, I guess maybe part of the, I don't know, danger of using both of these sets of tables, I guess I kind of want to show that we do see valuation increases. We don't want to necessarily ignore those entirely, because we could just simply just say, well, based on a $150,000 home each year, the taxes are only going to go up this much, but we also know our tax base is growing in part because those valuations are going up too, so that is impacting people if their valuation went up as well. Their
Right.
share of the pie is going to be bigger that they're paying, so yeah, you kind of have to, I know that's not your question, but when you look at the fact that there are valuation increases too, that does impact individual properties as well. But yeah, I think it's just a function of how the formula works with compounding the fact that the valuation went up and the amount of the exclusion went down then, because that's being phased out.
Right.
Okay, anybody here have any questions, comments they'd like to make? All right. Well, thanks for attending. Our next step then is tomorrow night, or?
We're proposing to just kind of review the proposed revenues for the utility funds so that we can kind of finalize that, and then we'll look at